American history is complicated. There are countless movements and important events that took place to the point where we might get lost. However, there is one part of history that we know about for sure. Systemic racism was hidden and denied by the government for the longest time. It's a sensitive topic, and most people find it difficult to discuss. But in reality, systemic racism is the rotten core of America.
For so many Americans, over the last 10 years, what's happened is that the way that we talk about racism in this country has become, and the way we understand the history of racism in this country, is that it's not only just an interpersonal phenomenon, but we recognize it as a systemic one, a sociological one, a historical one that's embedded in systems and structures.
As Clint Smith explains, systemic racism is embedded into America. But what exactly does it mean? The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines systemic racism as oppression of a racial group to the advantage of another as perpetuated by inequity within interconnected systems, such as political, social, and economic systems. When you analyze how the United States began, assimilation and mass murder of indigenous people is where you start.
It is because of my people and the first people on this continent that we stand here today on this floor.
One of the myths that American children were told in school was that Christopher Columbus discovered America. In reality, over 500 unique indigenous tribes originally owned the land we now stand on. While colonizers were forcefully taking hold of land, they were transporting millions of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. This came to be known as the transatlantic slave trade. Colonizers, as well as their descendants, would go on to exploit African Americans to create a nation that they wanted to live in. Those times of tragedy and oppression still impact America today. Numerous general aspects of life affect minoritized groups. These can be broken into categories, examples including education, housing, environment, and healthcare. Chapel Hill, North Carolina is a progressive and welcoming area. However, the city holds a rather dark history. Similar to a handful of states, North Carolina was segregated during the early 1900s. The harsh Jim Crow laws impacted minorities, especially the African American youth. Education was the area where lots of young black people found the most intense struggle.
No black counselors, no black athletics players, okay, and so I didn't have any black mentors, or in many cases you're the only black in the class.
Students would begin to protest. The Chapel Hill 9 is a great example of local historical activism. In 1960, these 9 black teenagers held the first ever sit-in in Chapel Hill. They were inspired by a similar activist group known as the Greensboro Four. The Chapel Hill 9 have been recognized for their efforts, with an honorary marker being revealed on Franklin Street in 2020. North Carolina is filled with this kind of racial prejudice in its history. For example, there was the Warren County landfill crisis, and even the racism behind the upbringing of the death penalty within the state. We can tell stories of what has happened in North Carolina. We know it as a part of its history. So shouldn't we be able to do the same with our nation as a whole? The next president of the United States of America has the responsibility to acknowledge this part of history and understand its impact. Shouldn't they know about the many indigenous cultures that have been lost? Shouldn't they know that enslaved Africans used to only count as 3/5 of a human? A president cannot lead without fully understanding their country's history.
The question becomes, have we achieved the dream? And the reality is absolutely not. We have made progress and strides, but we still have a long way to go.
At the end of the day, it is up to us as American citizens to recognize the upbringing of our country. It is simply not enough to have it in the history books. We are obligated to teach it, learn it, understand it, and respect it. The impact is still around today. Change can still be made. Be aware and be educated. Thank you.